I would like to commend this initiative of Religions for Peace and sincerely wish I could have joined you in person this morning. I also take this opportunity to commend Religions for Peace, Ring for Peace, and the German Federal Foreign Office for the very successful conference of religious leaders on faith and diplomacy, an intergenerational dialogue held in Lindau last October, and which I had the pleasure of attending. From the perspective of my mandate, the stark reality remains that sexual violence continues to pose a grave threat to both individual and international security. Our discussion today takes place against the backdrop of several unfolding crises in which women's rights and physical security are in peril. Right now, the eyes of the world are on Tigray, where women and girls have been subjected to sexual violence since the outbreak of hostilities in November 2020, as documented in the recent Joint Investigation Report. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, sexual violence continues as part of retaliatory attacks by armed groups and in the course of military operations by state forces. This year, the theme of the general debate at the United Nations General Assembly was Building Resilience Through Hope, with upheavals from Afghanistan to Ethiopia, from Yemen to Syria, squarely in focus. The aim was precisely to remind us all that we can choose the future we want. We can choose solidarity over division, empathy over extremism, equality over exclusion. Since I took office in 2017, I have expanded the circle of stakeholders to include religious leaders who can exert a powerful moral influence on communities to shift harmful social norms and alleviate stigma. Religious organizations are essential to the culture and sustenance of communities and are uniquely positioned to champion efforts to end violence against women. In pursuit of these goals, religious leaders have the potential to mobilize all sectors of society. As trusted actors with broad networks and deep roots in communities, religious leaders and faith-based organizations can build bridges rather than walls. Specifically, they can help to break down the walls of silence that surround sexual and gender-based crimes, walls that are built with bricks of stigma, shame, and victim blame that imprison survivors for life while perpetrators walk free. My mandate as Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict was created by the Security Council to serve as United Nations spokesperson and political advocate in combating war's oldest and most enduring scourge. Rape has a hidden history due to deeply entrenched social taboos. Yet, no problem in human history has ever been solved through silence. In addition to political will on the part of the state, the willingness of religious leaders to use their moral authority to help silence the guns and amplify the voices of women can help to turn the tide. Religious authorities have often played a role in countering incitement to violence by spreading messages of tolerance and by urging restraint on the part of arms bearers. They have provided sanctuary to vulnerable civilians in places of worship. They have promoted reconciliation as part of the consolidation of peace. Preventing and addressing conflict-related sexual violence is one of the great moral challenges of our time. I am therefore working to expand the circle of allies and champions united in common cause to translate political promises into tangible progress where women live and work, in marketplaces, at schools, at water points, and polling booths. Conflict-related sexual violence is not a problem to be borne by the victim alone. It is a social problem that requires a whole of society response. Sexual violence is the only weapon of war that is both powered by and perpetrates gender inequality. Like all violence, it begins in the mind. To disarm this weapon, we must demobilize the mindsets that breed and normalize misogyny. In this regard, I'm pleased to announce that my office is currently working on a framework of cooperation with Religions for Peace and Ring for Peace. This cooperation is critical, the more so that religion is paradoxically both a source of assistance and a barrier to women surviving sexual violence. In some contexts, my mandate has indeed recently faced opposition from religious and traditional leaders. In Somalia, efforts to pass a robust sexual offences bill have met with pushback from Islamic scholars seeking to lower the age of marriage, contrary to Somalia's human rights commitments. Sexual violence cases are rarely prioritized for prosecution, being often referred to traditional justice mechanisms, which tend to privilege the interests of the community over the welfare of the victim. Different legal systems operate in parallel, often resulting in the release of suspected perpetrators from police custody following interventions by traditional and religious leaders. Similarly, in Mali, conservative religious leaders have publicly opposed the passage of new legislation criminalizing gender-based violence. This highlights the need to mobilize a broad constituency from both the formal and informal spheres to promote social change. History demonstrates that religion can be a vector of violence or a force for peace. Equally, religious leaders can be obstacles to progress or agents of change. Religious diplomacy can help to counter extremism, hate speech, stigma, and harmful social norms. Faith-based organizations on the front lines are often trusted actors in the humanitarian response at a time when distrust in the state may be high and institutional capacity may be low. They also have a unique understanding of local dynamics related to conflict, power, and gender at a time when international access may be constrained. Strategic partnerships are thus critical to unlock access, resources, and local knowledge to address the root causes and drivers of violence. A holistic, whole-of-society approach to diplomacy is needed, taking faith into account as a relevant force in foreign relations. Religious leaders can support women's organizations, vocally divest extremists of the mantle of religious legitimacy they crave, call into question the dichotomy between religious and secular worldviews, and foster broad-based ownership of human rights norms. They can underscore that physical integrity and bodily autonomy are not favors to be granted or withheld. They are the universal inheritance and birthright of every human being. They can co-create solutions with survivors in ways that validate them as actors, rather than relegate them to the status of passive beneficiaries. And they can role model inclusion and respect. Long after the guns have fallen silent and the ink has dried on a peace agreement, the trauma of rape persists. I therefore call on all religious leaders from all faiths to use their reach and influence to help replace horror with healing and hope. Our collective conscience and common humanity depend on it. Thank you.